Hello everyone, I hope you're doing well. Today the subject of my lecture is Shaw and Pygmalion. Shaw does mean George Bernard Shaw. In this lecture and the next one, we will look at writers who illustrate the strong Irish voice to be heard in English literature. So this lecture and the next one actually highlights those writers whose voice can be heard in English literature. English literature is almost it's the same as Irish literature. Or you can say that Irish literature is the same as English literature. That was not that does not go beyond English literature. Irish literature comes under the umbrella of English literature at that time. George Bernard Shaw was born in Dublin, Ireland, just after the Great Famine that killed half of Ireland's population. So a famine occurred in that time and which killed almost half of the island's population. He moved to London in his 20s to make his fortune, but he disparaged the English and a vein of Anglophobia runs throughout his work. Although he moved to London in his 20s, but he had a great hatred for England and anything that is related to English, right? Because of so many reasons, he hated England and the things related to English. Anglophobia, the word here shows that because this word means that hatred against English or England or anything that is English, right? So Shaw is one of those Irish writers who really hated England. Shaw became radically anti-establishment, espousing socialism, feminism, and evolution in his work. So he became such a writer, radically anti-establishment. He was against establishment. He was in favor of socialism, feminism, and abolition in his work. Yet he was revered by the British and widely successful almost from the moment that his plays began to appear on stage. Yet, despite having all these attributes, despite hating the British works and English people, or you can say English work, because of so many reasons, British, the British and England widely revered him or respected him, and he was still famous on stage. His plays was famous in England and Britain, despite all the attributes which I have already discussed about the writer. In this lecture, we will look at Pygmalion, Shaw's statement about language, and the class system in English society. So these things will also be covered in our lecture. That is Pygmalion, one of the most famous works by Shaw, right? And his statements about language and the class system in English society. These things will be covered in the lecture. The play does not end on the same happy note as its popular musical adaptation, My Fair Lady. So this Pygmalion play, this does not end on the same note as the copy, as an imitation. I must say that as an imitation of this play, that is My Fair Lady, ends on a happy ending, right? So this play, however, Pygmalion does not end on the same happy note or happy ending. Although Eliza marries an upper-class gentleman, Shaw leaves open the possibility that the injustice of the class system cannot be eradicated with simple solutions. Although Eliza in the play marries an upper-class gentleman, so Shaw still leaves the possibilities. Shaw still tells the readers the ideas that the class system cannot be eradicated with these simple solutions like marrying somebody in an upper class society, upper class family, etc. So let us look at the outline of the lecture here. The Irish voice is very strong in English literature, right? First thing, this Irish voice is very strong because this Irish literature comes under the ambit of English literature. You cannot separate the Irish literature from English literature because this this literature is occupied by English literature, right? And writers are occupied, country is occupied by England. So that's why the literature does not go beyond English literature, the Irish literature, I mean. Ireland has spawned literary giants from Swift to Wilde to the subject of this lecture, George Bernard Shaw. So Ireland, although produced some great literary giants like Swift, like Oscar Wilde, right, and like George Bernard Shaw, The Irish contribution is dependent on the complicated relationship between the two nations, rebellious on one side and at times brutally repressive on the other. So, this Irish contribution in literature to literary works is dependent on so many things, and one of them is the complicated relation or complications between the two nations, that is England and Ireland, because rebellious on one side, that is Ireland, and at times some brutally repressive on the other, that is from England's side. England was brutal at times, and Irish was, you can say, Irish people were rebellious because they used to bear the repressions or oppressions on the behalf of England, right? Until the 1920s, Ireland was an English colonial possession, and the segment of Northern Ireland called Ulster is still tied to the UK. So until this 1920s, until recently, Ireland was an English colonial possession, like we, the subcontinent was also an English colonial possession. We can say we too were a colony until 1947, right? So same as the case with Ireland. Ireland too was a colony or an English colony until 1920s, and and a segment of Ireland known as Ulster. This is still tied to the UK, right? It is still connected with the UK. It is still occupied by the UK. The borderland between North and South Ireland and between Ireland and England has been important to a number of writers, including the poet Seamus Heaney. So this borderline between South and North Ireland, or you can say Ireland, England, this borderline is important to a number of writers, including this poet, famous poet Seamus Heaney. Nonetheless, the cultural roots from which literature in Ireland springs are not English. So, despite all these things, despite all these relations or affiliations, the cultural roots from which literature in Ireland springs, those are not English. Those are not purely English, right? Although that literature comes under the umbrella of England or the Great Britain, right? Still, the cultural roots are not English roots, right? They are different one. Irish literature has a different character or personality. This lecture and the next will deal specifically with the Irish connection, beginning with the great playwright George Bernard Shaw. Shaw used the London theatre as a bully pulpit for himself as both an Irish and a British writer. So Shaw was such a writer who used this London theatre as a bully pulpit for himself, uh, as both an Irish and a British writer. Of course, he was born in Ireland, still he moved to London in his 20s, so he is both an Irish and a British writer in a way. So he used this London theatre as a bully pulpit. Bully pulpit does mean he used this as an advantageous position from which to express from which he could express his views. So this bully pulpit is defined as an advantageous position from which to express one's views. So he used this London theatre as bully pulpit. That is, he used this for his own profit or advantage, right? Both because both as an Irish and British writer, and he used the comedy of manners. This is a new uh, genre in literature. So he introduced this comedy of manners in his works as a vehicle for what may more probably call the drama of ideas. So he used this new genre, that is comedy of manners, as a vehicle for what may more probably be called the drama of ideas. So he used this comedy of manners for the drama of ideas, right? In Shah's case, these ideas, in his case, these ideas included Marxism, evolution, feminism, and even vegetarianism. Shaw was radically anti-establishment on every front, a characteristic that ties in easily to the protest element in the Irish literary heritage. So, of course, as an Irish, and he was radically against, he was hugely against this, and he was radically anti-establishment. As you can see, he was radically against establishment because uh, Ireland, uh, you can say, islands faced a lot of trouble at the hand of England or the Great Britain. So that's why he also became an anti-establishment on so many fronts, or you can say on almost every front. The ideas popularized in his plays stemmed from Ibsen, Wagner, Nietzsche, and Marx. So these ideas, uh, which springs in him, are in his writing, or blossoms in his writing. These ideas stems from Ibsen, the great philosopher writer, and Wagner, Nietzsche, and Marx. The English public, which is by nature resistant to foreign ideas, responded by installing him as an institution. Or yet, the English public, the public of Britain, Great Britain, which is naturally not in favor of foreign ideas, that that English public still responded by installing him as an institution. So he considered him as an institution. As an amused Shah complained, the English came to revere him as much as they revered their bishop. So you can say that those that the English public came to respect him or revere him as they revered or respected their bishops, right? So they respected or revered Shah in the same manner, and they paid his sermons, his plays as little attention as they paid those of their bishops, and they paid the same amount of attention to his plays and sermons which they pay to their to their bishops. George Bernard Shaw, whose period starts from 1856 and ends at 1950, a very large period. He was born in Dublin, the capital of Ireland, in the aftermath of the famine of the late 1840s, a catastrophe during which Ireland lost half its population. We discussed this point at the very start of our lecture, right? Shaw called his homeland John Bull's other island. So he used to call his homeland as John Bull's other island. Why? Because John Bull, the mythical representation of the worst aspects of England, had never looked after its other island and had never more shamefully neglected it than than in the period just before Shaw was born. So John Bull is the kind of mythical representation of a very bad, you can say, are the worst aspects of England. And John Bull is such a representation, such a mythical character who had never looked after his other island, right? Like England did not care of his other island, right? Which was there in the form of island. So that's why he used to name it. He used to call it as John Bull's because it was not taken care of, right? It was not well taken care of. Like England never took care of this island or this colony. That's why Shaw also named it as John Bull. A vein of Anglophobia would run through Shah's drama. Of course, whenever you read his drama, you will see a huge hatred against English or anything related to English or England or Britain, right? Shaw was educated in Dublin as a modestly privileged child of the Protestant ascendancy. So he was educated in Dublin, right? As a modestly privileged child of the Protestant ascendancy, his family life was unhappy because his parents separated when he was only 16 years old. Families and family relationships to Shaw would mean nothing thereafter, after the separation of his mother and father. Shaw came to see marriage as nothing more than licensed prostitution. So, according to him, marriage was nothing but a licensed prostitution in which he gave a license for prostitution. Every marriage was a marriage of convenience, a view illustrated in his play, Great Marriage. So he expressed his views regarding marriage as licensed prostitution or marriage of convenience in his great play that is entitled as Getting Married. In another Shaw's plays, Mrs. Warren's Profession, rather than buy into the marriage scam, the resourcefulness heroine becomes an enlightened brothel keeper. So in this Shaw's plays, that is Mrs. Warren's Profession. So uh, the heroine instead of indulging herself into the marriage scam, which Shaw called it as a marriage scam, so she chose to adopt a profession of a brothel keeper, right? So Shaw expressed this story or revealed the story in his play Mrs. Warren's Profession. You can say in his eyes, marriage had no value. School was not much to Shah's taste. Maybe it is not too much of your taste as well. I'm just joking. He often said that schools were prisons in which children were kept to prevent them from disturbing their parents. So, according to him, schools are such places where children are only kept for the sake, children are only kept because they should. Because their parents want that that the children should not disturb them at home. So, according to Shah, schools are only such places which only bound children, which only, which only, which only limit the people from limit the children or the students from disturbing, or which only keep students from disturbing their parents at home. He moved to London in his early 20s to make his fortune in the world of literature and the theatre. Of course, I have discussed this point already as well, that he moved to London in his early 20s to make his fortune in the world of literature and the theatre. He wanted to get fame. You can say he wanted to get more knowledge in theatre and literature. That's why he moved to London from Dublin. In London, Shaw educated himself in the British Museum Library and wrote mediocre novels. He also became a Fabian socialist. Socialism was one socialism was one of the radical doctrines of the time, taking shape as what we know now known as Labour Party. So we can say that Shaw was such a writer that, or such a man that who educated himself in the British Museum Library after he moved to London, and he wrote mediocre novels at the start, and then he also became a Fabian socialist. So Fabian socialists are the Fabian Society is such a thing that the Fabian Society, you can say, is a British socialist organization, right? Whose purpose is to advance the principles of democratic socialism via gradualist and reformist effort in democracies, rather than by revolutionary overthrow. So this Fabian Society believe in the principles of democratic socialism, right? Uh, uh, you can say they wanted this democratic socialism through a reformist effort in democracies, not through revolutionary efforts, or revolutionary. You can say through the efforts through the revolution. You can say not rather. They did not believe in revolutionary efforts. They believed in democratic socialism. And Shah was one of Fabian socialists. Socialism was one of the radical doctrines of the time, taking shape as what we now known as Labour Party. So this shape in England is now known as the Labour Party. In the form of Labour Party, you can see this socialism in England. Shaw wrote brilliant criticism of music and drama, and eventually turned his hand from drama criticism to plays. So he also wrote a criticism of music and drama brilliantly, and then he turned his hand from drama criticism to plays. Then he moved his attention from drama criticism to plays. Almost from his debut on the London stage, he was highly successful and became wealthy. He remains the only person to have been awarded both a Nobel Prize 1925 for his contribution to literature and an Oscar in 1938 for the film version of Pygmalion. So he was almost, you can say, uh, he remains only almost only person to have been awarded both a Nobel Prize and an Oscar prize for his works, right, in 1925 and in 1938, right. So he was a very wealthy writer as well. Shaw's first plays produced in 1892 was Widower's Houses. So this is first plays he produced in 1892, known as Widower's Houses. It is a satire tracing the corrupt capitalist income, in this case rents from slum properties, that allows the liberal middle classes to pursue their comfortable lifestyle in good conscience. So in this play, you can say that this play is a satire which traces the corrupt capitalist income. It tells how the corrupt capitalist earns, right? So in this case, or in Vitover's house's case, you can say in this satire, he criticized, or he traced the rents from slum properties, which allows liberal middle classes to pursue their comfortable lifestyle in good conscience, right? By on the at the cost of the rents which they used to earn from slum properties. and Shah was against this, and he hugely criticized this thing in widowers' houses. Respectable English society, Shah demonstrated in the play, is founded on exploitation of those classes it chooses to call unrespectable. So this is a very strong criticism of corrupt capitalists here, because according to Shah, this respectable English society, this is founded, or this stands on the exploitation of those classes it chooses to call unrespectable. According to Shaw, the respectable English society, the so-called respectable English society, stands or lives at the cost of those classes whom they call unrespectable. That is the poor people, you can say. Shaw's early plays, like those of his fellow Irishman Oscar Wilde, tend to be playful. So, like his contemporary, as you can say, and like as Oscar Wilde, this his compatriot. His plays were also, his early plays were also be playful. Like, for example, Arms and the Man. In Arms and the Man, for example, he explores Carlylean notions of heroism, and the devil's disciple turns upside down conventional myths from the American Revolution. So in this Arms and the Play, he actually digressed, or he changed the direction of a hero, or Carlylean notions of heroism, that he gave a different kind of, he introduced us to a different kind of hero. And the devil's disciple turned upside down. And this, in another work, that is the devil's disciple, this turns, this you can say, this turns upside down the conventional myths about the American Revolution. The conventional myths about the American Revolution were criticized, or were changed, in this work, that is the Devil's Disciple. He gave a different view of this American conventional, this different view of American Revolution, which we used to get, which we used to see in the conventional myths. Shaw would write for production more than 60 plays. This is a huge work, more than 60 plays. So he wrote for production. But as his career progressed, his themes became larger. Uh, with the passage of time, with the passage of his career, his themes became wider and larger. In Caesar and Cleopatra in 1898, he turned his satirical eye to the more sacred of British chaos empire. So in this work, uh, he turned his eye to the most sacred of British cows, that is, you can say, empires. We criticize British cows, sacred British cows, that is British Empire. In Man and Superman, which was written in 1903, the subject was heaven and hell. Shaw was adversarial in every aspect of life. So he was kind of adversarial. He used to resist against so many things, right, in that time. His most ambitious venture was back to Methuselah, a metabiological Pentateuch based on the five basic books of the Bible. Here he takes on Genesis, expounding at length his eccentric views on evolution. Man, Shaw believed, would not realize his potential until he transcended sex and achieved a lifespan of a century. So he also wrote regarding these things, the metabological Pentateuch, this work based on the five books of Bible, right? So here he expounded ideas. He gave his eccentric, different, strange views on evolution, right? According to him, a man would not realize his potential, right? His real potential, his abilities, until he transcended sex. So according to Shaw, this sex actually limits man, right? Until unless he does not, or she does not go beyond this sex thing. So he or she man cannot achieve a lifespan of a century, right? So Shaw's plays Pygmalion is much imitated and adapted. Its best known knockoff is the musical My Fair Lady. So this Pygmalion is much imitated and adapted. You can form an imitation of this work in the form of My Fair Lady, because this My Fair Lady is the imitation or the knockoff of Pygmalion, which probably would have Muse and Pleases other. So these are the details regarding Pygmalion. You do not you will read this Pygmalion maybe in the fifth or sixth semester. This play is included in your course, and you can also see the details here, or a kind of short summary of the play. I'm not going to discuss all these things regarding this play, but you can read if you're interested, right? And of course, you will read the whole play in fifth or sixth semester. So this is the end of the lecture. If you have any question, please do ask. Thank you very much for watching.